Congratulations on getting your hands on a Triad Modular Bullpup Chassis. Today, we're going to go over how to install a stripped mil-spec lower receiver into the Triad chassis. You're going to need a few tools to get started. A 3/8 drive ratchet, a small rubber mallet, and a 3/32 pin punch. If you're working on a Foxtrot Mike version like I am today, you're also going to need a T27 Torx wrench and a small telescoping magnet. All other wrenches will be included with your kit. Begin your installation by prepping your mil-spec receiver. Your receiver should be a standard, bare, mil-spec receiver without a trigger guard. No other receiver will fit the chassis. If you're starting with a completely bare receiver, you will need to install a bolt catch, our mag release components, and the provided Rave 140 trigger and pins. If you are using an existing receiver from a previous project, just remove everything except the bolt catch. Locate packet HP100 and remove the mag catch assembly. Unthread the button by turning counterclockwise, then unthread the small pin on the mag catch using an Allen wrench. Set the button, spring, and pin aside. Insert the mag release into your mil-spec receiver from the left side of the receiver. Place the mag release spring into the cavity on the right side of the mil-spec receiver. It should be sitting over the mag release stud. Now, push the mag release button into the button slot on the right side of the receiver. You must overcome the spring tension enough for the button to slide down into the slot on the receiver while pushing the mag catch out the other side. Now, rotate the mag catch on the left side clockwise, threading the stud into the mag release button on the right side. To work correctly, tighten until there's approximately 7/16 of the button exposed on the right side. If your bolt catch is already installed, please proceed to the next step. To install a bolt catch, begin by putting 3 to 4 layers of tape on the side of your receiver, unless you want it to look like mine. This will protect the receiver while driving in the bolt catch roll pin. Tap the roll pin into the receiver just enough for it to stay in place on its own. Insert the spring and the plunger. Hold the receiver upright and insert the bolt catch. While keeping the holes aligned, drive the roll pin through the receiver hole and bolt catch. Use the pin punch to seat the roll pin. Locate the Rave 140 trigger and extended trigger pins from the HP 105 hardware packet. Remove the screws from the trigger pins and set them aside. I recommend putting them back in the bag they came in so you don't lose them. Install the trigger and pins. roughly centering the pins in the receiver. Take note that the extended trigger pins will be wider than your receiver. This is totally normal. At this point, the receiver should have the bolt catch, trigger, and trigger pins installed. Now it's time to take this receiver and install it into the Triad chassis. Begin by removing the 4 T15 screws along the body of the chassis. Once the 4 screws are removed, remove the left side of the chassis and set it aside. Insert your receiver into the chassis, lining up the takedown pinholes. The receiver should fit snugly with no interference or wobble. The exposed trigger pins should fit into the appropriate holes on the right side of the receiver and will help locate the receiver in the housing. Locate the 4 small T8 screws that were removed from the trigger pins earlier. Thread 2 of them into the trigger pins on the right side of the chassis. Tighten each screw only until the pin starts to rotate. They will be tightened fully in a later step. Next up, locate the steel threaded insert from hardware packet HP102. Place the threaded insert into the back of the chassis. The threaded portion goes to the top and the protruding section should be facing the front of the chassis. Make sure the threaded holes line up with the hole in the chassis before proceeding. Reinstall the left side chassis half, lining up the trigger pinholes. Again, the receiver should fit snugly with no interference or wobble. Insert the 4 T15 screws that were removed earlier and tighten. Insert the 2 takedown pins from hardware packet HP100. This will align the receiver. If the takedown pins do not line up or inserting the pins forces a misalignment to other screw locations, please see the troubleshooting section of your manual, available by scanning the QR code printed on the business card in your hardware packet. Insert the remaining 2 trigger pin screws into the left side trigger pins. Leave them loose until the final step of the assembly. Apply thread lock to the threads of the mag release pin and insert it into the mag release lever. Thread in the pin using a 1/16 Allen wrench. This connection relies on thread lock to stay in place. Do not over tighten it. Thread in until flush and then test the receiver to ensure there is no bind. If the lever binds, loosen the pin slightly until the mag release functions correctly. Grab the rear block assembly and low profile screw pack from your hardware box. If you're running a rear safety selector, insert the selector detent spring into the small hole at the top of the block. Install the block over the rear grip mount area on the internal mil-spec receiver. Install the 1/4 inch screw and tighten the block to the receiver. If you're not running a rear selector, go ahead and locate the 2 selector covers and selector insert assembly from hardware packet HP100. Disassemble the insert assembly and install it into the chassis. tighten the screw with a 9/64 Allen wrench. Next up, you're going to want to grab your butt plate support. Mount the support using the 4 number 6 3/8 Allen screws and 4 of the number 6 lock washers. Then tighten these down. The Triad ships with a standard butt plate and an 1.5" extended butt plate. Choose the butt plate you wish to use, then attach it to the back of the assembly, sliding it over the chassis. You should notice a small gap here in the chassis that this butt plate is going to help close. You might even need to tap it over this gap using a small mallet. Next up, locate the threaded buffer plug. Using a 3/8 ratchet extension, thread it through the back of the butt plate and into the mil-spec receiver. Tighten until the butt plate is fully seated and then give it a 1/4 turn more. If you're working on a Foxtrot Mike upper, at this point you're going to need to put in the little buffer that ships with your FM upper. This is located in the hardware packet from your Foxtrot Mike upper, not the Triad pack. Press this buffer into the front of the buffer plug. Please note, Foxtrot Mike does not recommend shooting their uppers without this rubber buffer in place. Locate the butt plate hardware from hardware packet HP 102. Insert the 2 number 10 washers into the back of the butt plate, then install the butt pad onto the butt plate. You're going to go ahead and use the 5/8 long screw for the top and a 1" long screw for the bottom on a standard butt plate. And if you're using the extended butt plate, you're going to want to use the 2 1/4" long screws. Thread the appropriate screws into the butt plate and tighten. We're going to head back over to the trigger pins and tighten them up. Using the 2 supplied T8 Torx wrenches, tighten the trigger pin screws, using a Torx wrench on each side of the receiver. At this point, the receiver is now complete. Double check that all your fasteners are tight before proceeding. Next up, we're going to work on adjusting our trigger, and this part is really important. Failure to adjust properly can prevent the safety from working correctly, resulting in an accidental discharge. You're going to start by loosening the trigger actuator screw through the access window using the 1/8 Allen wrench. With the safety selector on safe and the hammer primed, slide the actuator up against the face of the trigger, leaving a very slight gap, then tighten. Tighten enough to collapse the lock washer only, do not over tighten. Move the selector to fire and test the trigger release. You should have a slight amount of movement before the trigger releases the hammer. Perform this test 3 to 4 times, then retighten the trigger actuator screw. This time you're going to want to get it nice and snug. If you're working on a Foxtrot Mike like I am, at this point we're going to need to add the front takedown lug to our upper. Temporarily connect the Foxtrot Mike upper to the Triad and take note of which bottom slot on the handguard lines up with the front takedown lug. Separate the upper and lower. Due to the lower profile handguard on Foxtrot Mike uppers, you will need to remove the handguard to install this front takedown lug. Using a T27 Torx wrench, remove the 2 screws on the left side of the handguard. Slide the handguard off of the upper receiver. Locate the front takedown post from your hardware box. Disassemble the takedown post. Using a telescoping magnet, insert the flange screw down through the handguard and into the appropriate M-lock slot. Add thread lock to the threads of the takedown screw. While holding the screw in place with the magnet, thread the takedown post onto the screw as far as possible, then remove the magnet. Reinstall the handguard onto the Foxtrot Mike upper and tighten the mounting screws on the handguard. Be sure not to over-tighten these 2 screws while reassembling your upper. Only tighten them enough to collapse the crush washers. Use the provided wrench from the hardware packet to tighten the screw through the side M-lock slot. Tighten just enough to allow the post to slide back and forth in the slot. Reinstall the upper, adjusting the M-lock post to line up, then insert all 3 pins. Use the wrench to fully tighten the takedown post screw with the closed end of the wrench. You can move from one side to the other to access the screw head during tightening. Your Triad rifle kit ships with our 1913 rubber cheek rest. The cheek rest mounts with a simple friction fit that retains it to your upper Picatinny rail. There are 2 lugs on the backside of the cheek rest designed to fit into the Picatinny slots. These prevent the cheek rest from sliding fore and aft. For a proper fit, make sure that these lugs are lined up with the slots in the Picatinny rail. Then just push it down. At this point, the lower chassis with the internal receiver should be completely assembled, the trigger tested, and the upper is now installed. We're going to double check that there's no round in the chamber, and then to test the trigger, we'll make sure that there is no magazine in the firearm. We'll charge the weapon and leave the selector on safe. Try to pull the trigger. It should not release the hammer. Next, place the selector on fire and dry fire the trigger. Charge it, dry fire it again, charge it, dry fire it again. It's best to try this 3 or 4 times to make sure the linkage is tight and the bolt is resetting the trigger properly. Next, insert an empty magazine, then charge the weapon. The bolt catch should hold the bolt open. Release the bolt, then dry fire the trigger. Charge the weapon, release the bolt, and try the trigger again. Try this a few times as well. If the trigger is releasing the hammer, but not resetting when you charge it, it is likely that the buffer is too close to the trigger itself. If you can't get the hammer to fall, even with the front selector on fire, it is likely that your buffer is too far. If everything so far has tested fine, you can proceed to live firing the weapon. Begin with 5 to 10 rounds in the magazine, slow firing to get a feel for the trigger and how the weapon functions. If everything is running well, continue putting rounds through it, alternating through slow firing and rapid firing if your range permits. If everything is working correctly, go ahead and final check that the trigger actuator screw is still tight, then pop the plastic access cover cap into the hole. This access cover will feel small, but as you press it into the cavity, it will expand and fill the gap. If you need to reset the trigger at a later time, the cover can be removed with a small flathead screwdriver. At this point, your Triad is ready to go. We hope you enjoy getting to shoot it, and we can't wait to see what everyone's builds turn out to look like. We hope this video was helpful, and we will have more detailed install videos for our other products coming soon. Please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. We'll catch you in the next one.